The Cleveland wind doesn't just blow, it bites. It's a mean, gray cold that settles into your joints and reminds you that you're 79 and alone. I was walking back from the Rite Aid, my boots clicking on the frozen pavement, clutching a small white bag. It contained the final bill from Martha's hospice care, a debt I'd be paying until they buried me next to her. 43 years I spent at the steel mill, breathing in soot so she could have a nice life. Now the house was silent, save for the hum of a refrigerator that I didn't have enough food to fill. I turned the corner of West 14th Street, my eyes fixed on the porch light I always left on, a habit from when she was still here. But as I got closer, I saw something that made my heart stutter. There was a bright orange sticker plastered across my front door. It looked like a cauterized wound on the peel and white paint. I reached the steps, my breath hitching in my chest. I didn't need my reading glasses to know what it was. An eviction notice. Final warning, it shouted in bold, heartless letters. I stood there, the rain starting to turn into sleet, soaking through my old army jacket. I looked at the neighbors' houses. The Millers, who we'd shared barbecues with for 30 years. The lights were on in their living room. I saw Jim Miller glance through the curtain, see me standing there in the rain, and then quickly pull the fabric shut. He didn't come out. He didn't ask if I was okay. Just yesterday, I'd been at the VFW post, looking for a bit of company. These were men I'd bled with, men I'd toasted at Martha's funeral just 3 months ago. But when I sat down, the conversation died. They looked at their beer as if it held the secrets of the universe. "Rough times, Ray," someone muttered, and then they all found a reason to leave. I was a reminder of what was coming for them: old age, loss, and the smell of mothballs and grief. I reached out to touch the orange paper, my fingers trembling. The lock on my door felt heavy, cold, and strangely unfamiliar. My son, Kevin, hadn't called in 3 weeks. I pulled my phone from my pocket, my thumbs clumsy. I dialed his number, praying for a voice. It went straight to voicemail. I looked up at the sky, the sleet stinging my eyes, wondering how a man could work his whole life only to end up a stranger on his own porch. I turned the key, but the cylinder wouldn't budge. The locks had already been changed. I stood on that porch for what felt like an eternity, the sleet turning my hair into a crown of ice. I pounded on the door, the sound echoing through the empty hallway of the house where I'd raised my family. "Hello? Is anyone in there?" I shouted, my voice cracking. No one answered. I walked down the steps, my knees popping, and headed toward the garage. I kept a spare key hidden inside an old WD-40 can on the workbench. My hands were so numb I could barely grip the metal, but I found it. I bypassed the main house and sat on my old stool in the garage, surrounded by tools I no longer had the strength to use. The silence was the worst part. When Martha was alive, the house hummed. There was the sound of the radio, the clinking of teacups, her soft humming as she tended to her African violets. Now it was just the wind whistling through the gaps in the garage door. I pulled out my wallet and began to count. $12. That was all I had until my Social Security check hit on Friday, and most of that was already spoken for by the utility companies. I'd been skipping lunch for 2 weeks, telling myself I wasn't hungry just so I could keep the heat on. But apparently even that wasn't enough. I thought about my friends again. Jim Miller had borrowed my lawnmower for 10 years. Pete from the mill had stayed on my couch for a month when his first wife left him. I had been the one they called when their cars broke down or they needed a $5 bill to get through the week. Now that I was the one drowning, they acted like I was contagious. I felt a hot surge of shame in my chest. A man of my generation doesn't ask for help. We provide, we endure. But as I sat there on that cold stool, wrapped in a grease-stained blanket I found in a corner, the pride started to feel like a heavy stone around my neck. I tried Kevin again.
This time it rang 4 times before he picked up. "Kevin, I'm in a meeting," he snapped. No hello, no how are you. "Kevin, the locks are changed. There's a notice on the door." I tried to keep the tremor out of my voice. There was a long pause on the other end. I heard him sigh, a sigh of pure exhaled annoyance. "I told you, Dad, we had to settle Mom's estate. Things are complicated. Just go to a motel for the night. I'll call you tomorrow." "With what money, Kevin?" I asked. The line went dead. He hadn't just hung up. He had abandoned me in the dark.
I didn't go to a motel. I didn't have the money for a bus, let alone a room. I spent the night in the garage, huddled next to the water heater for a scrap of warmth. Every time the heater kicked on, I thanked God for the small mercy of its vibration. When the sun finally crawled over the horizon, gray and uninviting, I gathered my dignity. I smoothed my hair in the reflection of a dusty window, straightened my veteran's cap, and started the long walk to the VA office. It was 3 miles away. To a young man, that's a stroll. To a man with a bad hip and 79 years of mileage, it's a trek through a desert. By the time I reached the downtown office, my legs were shaking. I stood in line for 2 hours, surrounded by younger men with missing limbs and haunted eyes. I felt out of place. I was just an old man who couldn't pay his bills. When I finally got to the window, the clerk didn't even look up. She was shuffling papers, her acrylic nails clicking like castanets. "Name?" she asked. "Raymond Carter. I'm a Vietnam veteran, 1st Infantry. I'm having some trouble with my housing." She typed something into the computer, her face blank. "Mr. Carter, it says here your property was transferred 6 months ago, a private sale. There's nothing the VA can do about a private real estate transaction." My heart dropped into my stomach. "Transferred? I didn't sell my house. That's my home. I've lived there since 1974. The paperwork was signed by your legal representative, Kevin Carter?" She finally looked up, a flicker of pity in her eyes. It was the pity that hurt the most. It felt like a eulogy for a man who wasn't dead yet. I walked out of the office and sat on a concrete bench. I pulled a small velvet box from my pocket. Inside were my medals, the Bronze Star, the Purple Heart. I'd kept them in a drawer for decades, rarely looking at them. They represented a time when I was brave, when I was needed. I looked across the street at a pawn shop with a neon sign that flickered, "Cash for Gold." I thought of Martha's headstone. It was still a temporary plastic marker because I couldn't afford the granite she deserved. My stomach growled, a sharp, twisting pain. I looked at the medals, then at the pawn shop, then at the cold, uncaring street. I realized then that the world doesn't care about your history. It only cares about your balance sheet. I stood up, my pride crumbling like old parchment, and started walking toward the neon sign. The pawn shop smelled of stale cigarettes and desperation. The man behind the glass had a face like a crumpled paper bag. He took my medals, turning them over with thick, calloused fingers. He didn't see the jungle or the fire. He just saw the weight of the metal. $50 for the lot, he said, not looking me in the eye. The Bronze Star alone is worth more than that in honor, I whispered. He shrugged. Honor don't pay my electric bill, Pop. Take it or leave it. I took the $50. It felt like blood money. I went to the Walmart down the street and bought a loaf of bread, a jar of peanut butter, and a bag of high-quality dog biscuits. I didn't have a dog anymore. Buster had passed a year before Martha, but there was a stray that hung around the park near my old house. I figured if I was going to be a ghost, I might as well feed the other forgotten things. I spent the afternoon sitting in the back of a public library, mostly to stay warm. I watched people come and go, young mothers with strollers, students with laptops. I was invisible to them. I was just a fixture, like the water fountain or the coat rack. I tried calling the Miller house. I just wanted to ask Jim if he could let me stay in his basement for a few days until I figured things out. When the phone rang, I held my breath. "Hello?" It was Jim. "Jim, it's Ray from next door." Silence. A long, heavy silence. "Ray, look, Kevin called us. He said you were having some mental episodes. He said we shouldn't engage for your own safety. He's got it all under control, Ray. He's taken care of you." "Mental episodes? Jim, I'm talking to you right now. He locked me out of my own house." I was shouting now, and a librarian looked over, pressing a finger to her lips. "I can't get involved, Ray. We've known you a long time, but we gotta trust the family on this one. Don't come by the house, okay? My wife is nervous." He hung up. The betrayal felt like a physical blow to the solar plexus. Kevin was poisoning the well. He wasn't just taking my house, he was erasing my reputation. He was making me a stranger in my own life. I sat there in the silence of the library, the $50 in my pocket feeling like a heavy curse. I realized then that the world doesn't care about your history. It only cares about your balance sheet. I stood up, my pride crumbling like old parchment, and started walking toward the neon sign. The next few days were a blur of cold benches and cheap calories. I slept in the park, hidden behind a clump of frozen bushes. My hip was screaming, a constant throbbing reminder of the shrapnel I'd carried since 1968. Every morning, I'd go to the gas station and wash my face in the sink, trying to keep the old man smell off me. I refused to look like a vagrant. I kept my shirt tucked in and my boots wiped clean. Dignity was the only thing Kevin hadn't figured out how to steal yet. On Thursday, I decided to go to the bank. I needed to see exactly how Kevin had managed to sell the house. I walked into the branch on Lorraine Avenue, the same place where I'd deposited my paychecks for 40 years. The manager, a young man named Marcus, used to call me Sir and ask about Martha's garden. When he saw me today, he didn't smile. He looked worried. He ushered me into his glass-walled office. "Mr. Carter, I was hoping you'd come in," he said softly. "Marcus, what happened to my house? The VA says it was a private sale. I never signed anything." Marcus sighed and pulled up a file on his screen. He turned the monitor toward me. There was a scanned document, a power of attorney form. It had my signature at the bottom. It looked like my handwriting, the shaky R and the long Y, but I knew I'd never signed it. "Kevin brought this in 3 months ago, right after your wife passed," Marcus explained. "He said you were overwhelmed with the medical bills and wanted him to handle the liquidation of assets to pay off the creditors. We had no reason to doubt him. He's your son, Raymond." "I forged it," I whispered. My hands were shaking so hard I had to sit on them. He waited until I was so blinded with grief I didn't know which way was up, and he stole my life. "If that's true, you need to go to the police," Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. He knew as well as I did that it was an old man's word against a successful son's paperwork. "I need my records, Marcus. Every transaction Kevin made since Martha died." "I can give you the last 90 days, but Raymond, the account is almost empty. He's been withdrawing the maximum allowed every day." I took the printouts, my eyes blurring as I saw the numbers. Thousands of dollars gone. My pension, my savings, the money we'd set aside for my funeral. I walked out of the bank and into the blinding midday sun. I felt a strange lightness, the kind you feel right before you faint. I wasn't just poor, I was a ghost in a suit. I was walking back toward the park when the world started to tilt. The sidewalk rose up to meet me, and the next thing I knew, I was staring at the underside of a parked Buick. The sound of the city muffled into a dull roar, like I was underwater. "Hey, someone help! This old man collapsed!" a voice shouted. I wanted to tell them I was fine, that I just needed a minute to catch my breath, but my tongue felt like a piece of dry leather. Hands grabbed my shoulders. Someone was calling 911. I felt a surge of panic. I couldn't afford an ambulance. I tried to push them away, but my strength was gone. I woke up in a hospital bed, the smell of antiseptic and floor wax filling my nostrils. A nurse was hovering over me, adjusting an IV drip. She looked young, maybe 25, with bright blue eyes that reminded me of Martha's. "Easy there, Mr. Carter. You gave us a scare. Dehydration and exhaustion. When was the last time you had a full meal?" "I'm fine," I croaked. "I need to go. I can't stay here." "You're not going anywhere until the doctor clears you, and we've called your emergency contact." My heart sank. "Kevin?" She nodded. "He said he'd be here as soon as he could. He sounded very concerned." I closed my eyes. Of course he did. He'd play the role of the devoted son for the hospital staff. He'd tell them I was confused, that I was wandering, that I needed to be placed somewhere safe. A facility. The word tasted like ash. An hour later, Kevin walked in. He was wearing an expensive wool coat and carrying a latte. He looked healthy, wealthy, and perfectly composed. He waited for the nurse to leave before he spoke. "What are you doing, Dad? Sleeping in the park? You're making you look like a monster," he hissed, his voice low and dangerous. "You are a monster, Kevin," I said, my voice stronger than I expected. "You stole the house. You forged my name. You took Martha's funeral money." Kevin leaned in close, his face inches from mine. "I saved you, Dad. That house was a money pit. The mill is gone. The neighborhood is trash. I'm putting the money into a trust for your care. You're going to a place in Westlake. It's nice. You'll have a TV and 3 meals a day. I'm not going to a home, Kevin. You don't have a choice," he smiled, and it was the most chilling thing I'd ever seen. "The doctor already thinks you're losing it. One more episode and I'll have you committed. Just stay quiet and I'll make sure you have a window view." He turned and walked out, leaving me alone in the sterile white light. For the first time since the war, I felt true, cold-blooded fear. I didn't sleep that night. I watched the clock on the wall, the second hand ticking away the remaining hours of my freedom. I knew I had to get out of there before the Westlake people showed up with their clipboards and their soft-soled shoes. At 3 a.m., when the hallway was quiet and the night nurse was busy at the station, I unhooked my IV. It stung, and a bead of blood bloomed on my arm, but I didn't care. I found my clothes in the plastic patient belongings bag and dressed with shaking hands. I slipped out the side exit, the cold air hitting me like a physical slap. I didn't have a plan, but I had the bank records Marcus had given me. I tucked them into my waistband before I collapsed. I started walking, avoiding the main roads, sticking to the shadows like I was back on patrol in the Highlands. My hip was afire, but the anger was a stronger fuel. I ended up at the VFW post. It was closed, but I knew where the spare key was, under the loose brick by the back dumpster. We'd all used it 1,000 times after hours. I went inside and sat in the dark, the smell of old beer and floor wax strangely comforting. I turned on a single lamp in the back office and started going through the bank records again. I looked at the dates. Kevin had started withdrawing money before Martha died. He'd been skimming from her hospice fund while she was still gasping for air. But then I saw something that made my breath stop. There was a deposit, a large one, 2 weeks ago, $250,000. It came from a company called Buckeye Development. I knew that name. Buckeye Development was the firm that was buying up the old neighborhood to build luxury condos. They weren't just buying houses, they were buying the whole block. Jim Miller's house, Pete's house, they were all sold. I realized then why my friends had turned their backs. They hadn't just been scared of my grief, they'd been bought. Kevin had brokered the deal for the whole street.
He'd used my house as the anchor, the first piece of the puzzle. He'd paid off Jim and the others to stay quiet, to keep me isolated so I wouldn't mess up the deal. My brothers had sold me out for a relocation check. I sat there in the dark, clutching the papers, a single tear finally escaping and rolling down my cheek. It wasn't just my son, it was everyone. I was the only thing standing in the way of their payday. I stayed in the VFW office until dawn. I didn't feel like a victim anymore. I felt like a soldier who'd finally identified the enemy's position. I used the Post's computer, a clunky old thing that groaned as it booted up, and searched for Buckeye Development. I found their corporate office address. It was in a shiny glass tower downtown. I also looked up the deed for my house. The transfer was there, but something was wrong. My name was listed as Raymond A. Carter, but the signature on the power of attorney was Raymond E. Carter. My middle name is Arthur. My son, in his haste to steal my life, had used my brother's middle initial, the brother who died in Korea 50 years ago. It was a small mistake, the kind a man makes when he doesn't actually know the person he's robbing. I left the VFW and went to the only person I thought might still have a shred of a soul, Sarah, the woman who ran the local diner where Martha and I had Sunday breakfast for 40 years. She was opening up, the smell of bacon filling the air. When she saw me, she didn't turn away. She gasped and pulled me inside. "Ray, we've been hearing horrible things. Kevin said you'd gone to a specialized hospital in Columbus." "Kevin is a liar, Sarah," I said. I sat at the counter and laid out the papers. I told her everything. Sarah listened, her face hardening. She was a mill worker's daughter. She knew what a forged signature meant. "That boy always was a snake," she muttered. "What do you need, Ray?" "I need a ride to the courthouse, and I need someone to witness a statement. I might be old, but I'm not dead." "I'll do more than that," Sarah said, reaching for her phone. "I'm calling my nephew. He's a lawyer for the VA. He doesn't take kindly to people stealing from vets." While we waited, Jim Miller walked in for his morning coffee. He saw me and froze. He tried to turn around, but Sarah barked at him. "Sit down, Jim. You're going to look Ray in the eye, or you're never eating in this town again." Jim sat, his face turning a blotchy red. "Ray, I didn't have a choice. We're broke. The mill pension isn't enough. Kevin offered us double market value if we all signed at once. He said you were taken care of." "You sold me for a condo, Jim," I said, my voice cold and steady. "I hope the granite countertops are worth it."
Sarah's nephew, David, arrived an hour later. He was a sharp-eyed man in a cheap suit who looked like he lived on coffee and spite. He spent 20 minutes reviewing the documents I'd gathered. When he saw the Raymond E. Carter signature, he let out a short, sharp laugh. "This isn't just a mistake, Mr. Carter. This is a felony. He forged a legal document to sell a property he had no right to touch. And since you're a veteran and over 65, this falls under felony elder abuse and mortgage fraud." We went to the courthouse. David moved through the halls like a man on a mission. By noon, we had an emergency injunction filed to halt any demolition or further sale of the property. But we weren't done. David called a contact in the district attorney's office. "I have a decorated vet here whose life was stolen by his son and a predatory developer," David said into the phone. "I'm bringing him over. You're going to want to hear this." As we walked out of the courthouse, my phone rang. It was Kevin. "Where are you?" he screamed. "The facility is waiting. The police are looking for you, Dad. They think you're a danger to yourself." "I'm at the courthouse, Kevin," I said. "I'm standing with a lawyer and a detective. I think you should come down here. We need to talk about Raymond E. Carter." The silence on the other end was absolute. I could almost hear his world collapsing. "Dad, wait. Let's talk about this. I can explain. It was for your own good. The money is safe, I promise." "You're not my son," I said. And for the first time in months, I felt no pain in my heart when I said it. You're just a thief who happened to share my name. Don't call me again." I spent the afternoon in a small, windowless room, telling my story to a detective and a court reporter. I showed them the bank records, the forged signature, and the eviction notice. I told them about the night in the garage and the medals I had to pawn. The detective, a man with graying hair and a weary face, kept nodding. "We see this more than you'd think, Mr. Carter, but most people are too ashamed to come forward. You're doing the right thing." "I'm not doing it for me," I said, thinking of Martha. "I'm doing it because she worked too hard for that house to let it become a lie." The justice was swift, though it didn't feel like a victory. Within 48 hours, Kevin was taken into custody. It turned out he'd used the Buckeye development money to pay off massive gambling debts. He hadn't been putting it in a trust, he'd been throwing it into a black hole. Because the sale was fraudulent, the deed was returned to my name. The developers tried to fight it, but the bad press of "Suit steals house from war hero" was enough for them to back off and settle quietly. I moved back into my house on a Tuesday. The Miller house was empty. Jim and his wife had been forced to move out when the development deal fell apart. They lost their bonus money and ended up in a small apartment across town. None of the VFW friends came by to apologize. They were too ashamed, or maybe they just didn't care enough to try. I didn't mind. I'd realized that the silence of an empty house is better than the noise of fake friends. The final twist came a week later. I was cleaning out the attic, looking for some Martha's old photos, when I found a small metal box hidden behind the insulation. Inside was a life insurance policy I never knew existed. Martha had taken it out in secret 30 years ago, paying the premiums with her sewing money. It was made out to Raymond Arthur Carter. The payout was enough to pay off the medical bills, replace the headstone, and live comfortably for the rest of my days. I went to the cemetery that afternoon. The new granite headstone was beautiful, etched with African violets. I sat on a small folding chair and talked to her for a long time. "We're okay, Martha," I whispered. "The house is still ours, and I got my medals back." The pawn shop owner had been visited by Sarah's nephew. He'd returned them for free, along with a stuttered apology. As I walked back to my car, I saw a familiar figure at the gate. It was Kevin. He looked haggard, his expensive coat gone, replaced by a cheap windbreaker. He was out on bail, awaiting trial. "Dad," he said, his voice trembling, "please, I have nowhere to go. They froze my accounts. You're my only son." I looked at him. I saw the boy I'd taught to fish, the man I'd been proud of, and the thief who had left me in the rain. I felt a flicker of the old love, but it was quickly extinguished by the memory of that orange sticker on my door. "You have a son, Kevin, but I don't have a child anymore." I got into my car and drove away, leaving him standing there among the graves. I went home, turned on the radio, and made a pot of tea. For the first time in a long time, the house felt full.